Back in 2007, my grandpa finally lost his 20-year battle with leukemia. My grandma couldn't manage well, being alone in the house they live in for almost 60 years. We moved my grandma into assisted living residence a few months later, and for insurance reasons, vacant property, my parents asked me if I'd like to move into the house so that I could watch the house and also to move out and not live at home. I said absolutely. I remember right after he passed away, strange things started happening. The portrait we had of him in the living room fell off its hook. Picture frames containing pictures of him flipped onto their front during the night. I didn't mind though because I thought my grandma was making it up. Before I moved in, my family got a big dumpster so we could clean some of the clutter out of the house. Since we'd spend most of the day cleaning and it was summer, we'd bring the family dog with us. My grandpa loved our dog dearly, but since he passed away, my dog wouldn't go down to the basement anymore, where my grandpa spent most of his time in his office. She refused to go into the basement at all and barked at the stairways a few times. This was weird, since our dog almost never barked. It finally made me think that he's here. I moved in shortly after. While I lived there, things went missing all the time. I had bought a new lock set to check the back door lock, brought it home, and put it on a cupboard to tackle on the weekend. A few days later, I go to change the lock. It's gone. After a week of looking around, I found it in the trunk of my uncle's old BMW 2002, which he stored it in the garage. I happened to be looking at the car. My grandpa was always a prankster, so I almost came to expect these occurrences. He used to wake up at 5:30 every morning to listen to the early news on the radio in the kitchen. I'd wake up some mornings and the radio would be on. I often heard typewriter noises coming from his office in the basement. It became comforting. I found myself talking to my grandpa out loud, having conversations with him. I missed him. After about 6 months, suddenly I wasn't hearing any noises anymore. Nothing was going missing. The radio wasn't turning on at 5:30. I shrugged it off for a few days, but it started to worry me. I went back to my parents and grabbed the dog, brought her back. She was apprehensive at first, but she entered the house. There was an issue though. Every time she'd been over since my grandpa died, as I mentioned earlier, she refused to go downstairs. This time though, she went downstairs and went right to his office. Nothing was any different about the office, but she wasn't barking. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't doing anything. That was when I realized he was gone. I broke down. Suddenly, I felt incredibly alone, even though it had been about 6 months since he died. It was the first time I felt like he was truly gone. Scariest moment of my life happened while my friend and I were camping in eastern Canada as teenagers. We decided to sleep in this abandoned camper we found deep in a large forest that was near our town. It had been there so long that small trees had grown up around it. We stumbled across it when we were exploring a few months back and thought it would be cool and brave to sleep there for a night. So, one weekend we did it. We arrived after dark because we had gotten lost trying to find the camper. We had a really low power flashlight, so it made it even more difficult. Once we finally found it, we opened the rusty door and stepped in. The sounds inside the camper were shrill and echoey. There were typical camper things strewn about: cups, empty cans, swollen Pulp Fiction novels. Already tired, we holed up in one end of the camper where the bed area had originally been, before the cushions had rotted away to almost nothing. A long hallway stretched the length of the camper so we could basically see from end to end. It was a miserable night. There were several rats living there. I saw them staring at us from a chewed out part of the ceiling. When the wind blew outside, the camper would shriek and groan. We even thought we heard a bear outside too, walking around. Still, we feigned bravery and acted like we were having a good time, but we were on edge. At some point, I woke up from a comfortable sleep. I sat up to adjust myself when I noticed some movement out of the corner of my eye. At the other end of the camper, there was a small window, and as I looked at it, I saw a man's silhouette that was clearly staring at me from the outside. At first I thought maybe it was a weird shape of a tree or something, but when I moved a bit to get a better look, the person clearly reacted and then froze. My heart was pumping, and I woke up my friend immediately, saying, "Someone's here," over and over and over in a whisper, not taking my eyes off his profile. He woke up immediately, and I nodded towards the window. He saw him too. We whispered frantically about who it could be and why he was staring at us. And for the next 10 minutes, no joke, we stared him down. The longer we stared at him, the more frightened we got. Occasionally, he would move, but always keeping his eyes locked on us. Eventually, I shouted at him, "Hey!" No reaction. My friend was braver than me and decided to shine the flashlight at him. As soon as he did, we realized our terrible mistake. It wasn't a window at all on the other side of the camper. It was a mirror. We had been staring down ourselves from the very start, completely idiotic. Still, it was the most fearful, relieving, and funny moment of my life that I'll never forget it. Closest to paranormal I've ever been. I'll be the first to say that all this stuff could have been taking place in my head. The mind is a freaky thing and can play some pretty trippy tricks on you. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad had always told me that in life, you shouldn't be scared of ghosts. Fear the living because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out was not covering the payments either. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month, and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer, and was going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog and headed up in my dad's car that he willed to me, to the cabin. Now, this was our family cabin that my parents had rented out throughout the years when we were not using it. I had keys to the cabin and also had a code for the alarms, so I didn't feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them of my stay. This has nothing to do with the coming story, but felt the need to mention it anyways. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal and nothing out of the unusual happened. Spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in aside from the occasional out to hit the slopes. With my dog as company and DVD/PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. Bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time there was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms and always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creeped me out. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name was Midnight, by the way, and he also since passed. Playing games and watching DVDs. That day it was a heavy snowfall, so I didn't feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car and decided to stay in. That's when things started getting a little bit weird. In our area there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins aside from these 2 were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees. Tall. This is important later on. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days I knew that no one was currently staying there. Give enough background and I'm going to jump into the weirdness. Around midday while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I may not have noticed. Maybe they're shut-ins like me. Alright, whatever. The prints led away from my cabin and they disappeared into the snow towards the denser part of the trees. Disregarded the footprints and I went back inside. Nighttime came around and I decided to head to bed. My dog Midnight was laying on the bed with me and I noticed his ears perk up to a standstill / listening precision. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I laid in bed and stayed silent. I was somewhat freaked out and could hear him moving around the stairs back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started doing his doggy dance for the sign that he had to go pee or that he wanted to go outside. Shit, well, fine. I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only, he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull on his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier, but he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking upwards towards the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but alright. Maybe there are forest animals out there that he wants to chase down. But fuck this. I didn't want to chance anything, so I pulled him back inside and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking around on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing, the steps seemed to be spaced apart like a man's length stride, so it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door expecting for me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and shoes along with my cigarettes and flashlight and went out onto the balcony. Fuck it, right? As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. Weird. Must have been all in my head. What about Midnight hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off my fear of paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin, and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between 2 branches. It was squatted on one branch and its arms were extended above its head, holding onto the branch above it. Fuck me. What the fuck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing, and stood just staring at and sat there motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in that thing's direction. But something in my head kept screaming not to. So I walked backwards to the inside of the room and pulled Midnight with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the lights in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to bed. But later on in the night, I heard light tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and didn't stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was, I had a feeling someone was inviting me to open the door. At the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and not do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed where I was. I passed out eventually and woke up in the morning and everything was normal. The rest of the week I spent there was non-eventful and nothing else out of the ordinary happened. I totally admit that it could have been all in my head. A lot of stuff was going on at the time, so I was pretty fucked up from all the drama. I grew up in the Arctic. In the town I lived in, as long as it was a clear night, it was extremely normal occurrence to see all sort of strange lights move across the sky. Keep in mind, the winter is long in the Arctic, which means longer amounts of time being spent under the stars. It's quite beautiful, as long as you don't mind the cold so much. Sometimes I would drive a snowmobile a few kilometers out of town, shut it down, and just lay down on the snow looking up at the majesty of it all. The only thing disturbing the silence is the occasional breeze. The northern lights are also a common occurrence. That doesn't happen every day, but often enough that they start getting ignored after a while, as long as they aren't too spectacular anyway. On one particular night, without asking my parents, it was their snowmobile, I decided to go on one of my midnight drives out of town. I drove a few kilometers over the hills to find a spot devoid of light pollution from town, shut off the machine, and set it into a good spot to look up and be retrospective. It wasn't all that interesting a scene. A few satellites passing here and there, some relatively boring activity affecting the magnetic field, etc. And then I started noticing a clicking noise. At first I thought it was the sound of the snow machine cooling down, as the engine expands and contracts a lot from the cold. But the source of sound definitely wasn't coming from that direction. My next thought was that there must be an animal nearby, in which case I need to go out of there fast. You don't really want to mess with a wild animal. But the clicking is far too regular for an animal to produce it. It was a fairly mechanical sounding, and again, the source of the sound isn't coming from anywhere around me laterally. It was coming from up. So naturally, I look up determined to ascertain the origin of this strange noise. I see what I always see. Stars, northern lights, a lazy satellite crossing the sky. All normal stuff. But before I dismiss it altogether and start heading home, I noticed something strange in the aurora borealis. There were 3 rather strong points of light. I ignored them at first, thinking they were oddly symmetrical stars, but this proved false. They were definitely getting brighter, and I kept staring in morbid fascination as they grew stronger and stronger, yet still only remaining single points in the sky. All the while, the clicking noise was getting louder and louder and more pronounced, almost like someone started tapping a pen on the desk to clacking billiard balls together inside of my head. Then it stops. The lights are gone. The clicking is not heard. Aside from being a little stiff, cold, and rather petrified, I'm fine. So I jump back on the snowmobile, thinking maybe I'm going crazy. The machine takes a little longer than usual to start up, and I'm beginning to worry. But soon it's running and I'm heading back to town. As I'm driving back, several plausible scenarios as to what occurred are running through my head. I'm thinking it could have been a helicopter from the mine, or some strange northern lights behavior. Probably not that big of a deal. I pull up to my house, lights are all dark. Strange. It wasn't that late when I left. Open outer door as quietly as possible. Remove winter gear, enter inner door. House is quiet. Really quiet. My parents are teachers and are usually up late marking or watching TV. All I'm thinking is I have to get to bed without anyone noticing. Proves to be easy as soon I'm under my cover. I go to set my alarm for the next day. All of a sudden, everything makes sense. Engine hard to start, stiff, rather chilly. Nobody up when I was gone, what felt like a relatively short period of time. It was almost 11 p.m. when I left, and now it was creeping up on 6 a.m. I stood staring at clicking lights for almost 7 hours. I never ended up sleeping that night, and I don't go on late night snow machine rides anymore.
Definitely elevating for the 966. The ill suicidal liable to take titles and make vital signs, but not like no cancer. Answer, there's no chance to advance to ya. Crew ya, got blazed through ya. The great super science, applying pressure, I desecrate with double O's and bubble folds while I cut you, bro. I juggle flows that goes below. reminiscent of exquisite cannibalistics and a sadistic doctor. My sick shit knocks ya improper. Got clockers like